And you carry this responsibility to then say, I'm going to choose myself in the middle of all of this noise, in the middle of all of this also internal pressure.
Welcome back to Life from Within. I'm your host, Kelly Dwyer. Today I'm speaking with Vika Nikitina Chala. She is a creative wellness entrepreneur and coach. And in today's episode, not only do we get into the benefits of creative wellness, how it can help you recover from burnout, become more assertive, speak up better, step into a bigger vision for yourself, but we really dive deep into Vika's own journey and transition from being a process engineer and an MBA graduate to stepping into this identity of artist and entrepreneur. So if you have a dream and you're struggling to figure out how you're going to step out of what you're in now and into that dream for yourself, you're going to want to listen to this episode. Enjoy. Today's guest is Vika Nikitina Chala. She's the founder of Rising Heart Coaching and Rising Heart Studio in Metuchen, New Jersey. So it's an in-person studio. Vika is an artist, expressive arts practitioner, and certified professional life coach. She helps people reconnect with themselves through creativity, reflection, and honest conversation. She spent 20 years in a pharmaceutical services career, and she reached a point where outward success no longer felt like success at all. She made the courageous decision to reimagine achievement and belonging on her own terms. So over the past decade, Vika has facilitated hundreds of hours of creative wellness work, helping individuals and communities relate to creativity not as performance or productivity. I could use some help there, but as an internal resource for connection, resilience, and truth. She's a mother of two, the author of Mother Monster Mystery, and is currently working on a children's book. At the heart of Vika's work is a deeply held belief creativity is for everyone, and it's essential to being human. Welcome, Vika.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for that good introduction.
So happy to have you. Okay, creativity is for everyone. You know, there was a time in my life that I didn't believe that I was creative. So that tells me you've run into other people like that. Tell me a little bit more about this belief.
There are many, many people whose initial belief about creativity is I'm not creative, I can't draw a stick figure, all of that. I'm not allowed in that space. And creativity is for everyone. I believe that because I think about how we all start and our ability to pick up any sort of writing or drawing instrument often comes before we're able to form a sentence. So it's one of the first languages that we possess as humans. So I believe that if our design is so that we are meant to create when we are very little, and you can see kids the way that they are just very open-hearted towards telling stories and playing with material, whatever you give them, they want to get their hands into it. They want to scribble. And so in the very beginning, it's a language and a form of communication that we start to use, especially communication of what is inside. So a child will use that to translate a story they might have. Maybe they just like how the material feels. Over time, as life takes us away from that and defines what creativity is and who is allowed to practice it and in what ways you're allowed to practice it successfully, professionally, all of those definitions constrain our ability to connect with our creative voice. And in work that I do in expressive arts and in art-based life coaching, it's helping people to reconnect with that portion of themselves as a useful tool that doesn't only work of like, I want to draw and be an artist. It works in other ways that you can use the practice itself to help inform you about your own inner world. And just expanding. As coaches, we believe about expanding the person into their true potential. And I really believe and I know that this is one of those tools that helps you expand into that potential.
So you position yourself as a creative wellness coach, practitioner. What about the creativity as wellness from your perspective?
So, creative wellness is a field that is about using creative practice more frequently and more intuitively to create a pathway between your general way, and it is a modality to maintain your well being, your mental well being, and the benefits are many, just as a modality of wellness like yoga or like running or meditation. Those are ones that our mind goes to frequently if we might think about, okay, how do I get healthy? There's, of course, physical health. A practice like running or yoga will be good for you. And then there is a practice, maybe I need more calm in my life, and meditation can be used. Again, yoga may be used. And those are recommended practices. We know about them. Your doctor might say this is what you might try. And interestingly, creativity is also a practice that has the same benefits and more than some of these other practices combined into one modality. For example, just painting with watercolor, even sitting down for a few minutes. I've been doing this practice for the last few days where I post a nervous system calming video. And I sit for 7 minutes to fill a small piece of paper, 7x3, with just watercolor. And in that practice, you notice yourself calming down. You can pay attention to your breathing. So it can be intermodal to where you're actually using other things as well, like paying attention to your breathing. You might journal along the way, write some things down, and it's a stress reducer. It will help to produce things like dopamine and serotonin and those neurochemicals that are good for us. And also, it helps to improve how your brain is working. So the other component of what we practice in classes is using the creative space as like a miniature practice for getting more comfortable with taking up space, with taking a risk, with saying what you need to say that you don't have the words for it. And you try it with art first. And as we know, our brains, as they create new neural pathways, it's easier to travel down that pathway and it becomes more familiar. That's another benefit, is neuroplasticity. Problem solving is another one. It's a very common one in artists, that artists who want to create a specific thing, they will work through the problem of it not looking right and not being what they are envisioning. And that's problem solving. So even if you're not trying to create a masterpiece artwork, by working with the art and by trying to figure out, okay, how do I solve this problem? It improves that portion of your thinking. So it's multifaceted.
It sounds like it. So there's stress relief, creative problem solving. So it works on strengthening those pathways in the brain. Transformation. So if someone is working on speaking up, being more assertive with their voice, what you're saying is by practicing through art or creative expression, it's almost like a backdoor way into greater confidence and ability to do the expression in the moment that it's needed outside of the creative practice.
It's one of those doorways. It's like beyond the thinking mind, right? In a coaching conversation, we are speaking, we are exchanging thoughts and words. And when you're practicing the creative aspect, you are in a different part of your mind. You're thinking intuitively. And one thing you made me think about is the social connection of doing it in a group. So I lead a lot of group work where there's prompts for journaling, there's prompts for conversation, and then there's a general theme around which people will make art, and all the artworks are personal. So we're not painting the same thing or we're not drawing the same thing. Everybody is responding in their own way. And when it comes to the discussion about that, you are speaking from your truth about like what you just created. And so that, to your point, is a practice of making your statement and making your voice sound true, because you have a work here, you have produced this work, and you put into it emotion, some planning, some whatever, some maybe even some disappointment. Maybe it doesn't work out the way that you, but through talking through all of that, you're able to sort of, okay, like it's all good. I just did this hard thing. It reinforces to the body that, yeah, you just did this hard thing and it was hard and it wasn't all perfect and beautiful and amazing. And you showed to yourself that actually, yeah, like you don't have these skills here, but you're still allowed to do the practice. You don't have to have all the skills. You don't have to be a perfect expert to do the practice. You just did it and you can do it. And so that's part of it. It's like that calming effect of putting ourselves out there and making that bid for vulnerability,
Yeah.
and it being met with safety.
I love that. You and I worked together a while ago in coaching. So I was actually your coach. And
Huh?
so at that time, you were working in corporate, you were doing business analysis work, I think, or business process systems, something like that. You were using your brain and doing a lot of analysis. Very smart work, smart person work. This theme of creativity was present even then. And so now here you are, you have your own creative arts, creative expressions studio in your town where you have people come and they work together and you are coaching people one-on-one and you're working with people virtually. So how did you go from, hey, creativity is important to me and I have this safe, stable career to taking the risk? There's so much between having the vision and actually then
Absolutely.
physically doing it. What did you learn about yourself? How did you get there? Was there a pivotal moment?
But let me talk first about the path and also the influencers. And in all honesty, one of the people that did support me is you in our conversation, because I still remember you asked me like, oh, so you're an artist. And I remember being like, no, there was all this like resist, even though I was at that point practicing and I showed you some of my like initial very beginner work and I was passionate about it. I remember talking to you about how excited I was about my characters and the specific style that I work in. So you said, oh, so you're an artist, right? And how does that, I think we talked about like the relationship between that and my other roles. And the resistance inside that was like, no, I'm not formally trained. I'm not good. My art's not good. I'm not like, how can I be both? So there was all of this narrative, all this story that said you have to choose one or the other, first of all. You have to be either this one, either the process engineer or the artist. And you're definitely not the artist because you don't have the resume. So that was the internal initial thing that came up. And when I was able to label myself as artist, it clicked something in me. So that's where I believe that the words, actually using your voice to say what it is that you are and the vision in the future, it really changes. Also because it allowed me to own what I was already doing and allowed me to recognize the beginner, intermediate, and expert levels of a thing. So I am an artist, a beginner artist. That's what I was at that point. And now I'm where I am now. And 50 years down the line, I will be where I will be then. But the path gets paved by then being on the path. And so I thank you for being one of those people. And it was very important. With that point, I had already started doing these creative wellness groups. I was already doing my meetup because I actually still have our notes. So I looked through them and I know that I was telling you about the meetup groups that I was having. It was all during a time when I realized when I was in business school, I did not make a single drawing, which was very unlike me. All other times since I was 3 years old, I made drawings, I made writing, I did some form of creativity. And then the 2 years of business school, it was like the well was dry, nothing was made. I recognized it and I was like shocked through this when I met you, soul searching, all of that. I started making art, started connecting with it again, realized that I was actually able to get a lot of creative vision. And so even though it was very primitive work, I was using digital work, but still the vision was there. There was this drive, this spring that wanted to come out. In terms of like a nugget, I would say listening, observing yourself to what is there, what is wanting attention is important. So I was able to find that in myself at that point. And it happened again, actually, and again a few times, which then led me to pave this path. So definitely paying deep attention and taking seriously those springs of like energy around something that's important and passionate to you.
So over a period of time, you would have these inflection points where you started to inhabit at a deeper and deeper level this identity of being an artist. So what was that moment where you're like, I just got to do this?
The moment of that was when I quit my corporate job for the first time. Okay. So like
I love that. For the first time.
right? For the first time. So that was about just being so overwhelmed because the trajectory that I've been on in terms of doing this work, it has been like, I will not let this go. And I will talk about a point where I was like, I have to choose. That one was more recent. But the first time of that, I have to do something about this, I have to do something big, was when I first quit my corporate job after 15 years. And it was after I had my son. I went back to work for about 4 months after parental leave. And then the pressure of everything just got so overwhelming. And then I was also dealing with the meaning of motherhood. And I met somebody who was doing a course that was actually called The Meaning of Motherhood, this philosophical course. And I think all of that together, and it took a year overall. It was like a fizzle, a bubbling, and then it was like over bubbling over the top. And the internal belief was that I'm an immigrant. I can't quit a job. I'm a woman. I can't leave the workforce. My team, what will they do? I am good at my job. All of those things. And of course, there's a counter to all of those things. But when it's so many and you carry this responsibility to then say, I'm going to choose myself in the middle of all of this noise, in the middle of all of this also internal pressure, I'm going to just break it, was very hard and very emotional. And then, of course, after I did it, also luckily being in a position where I could do that. It's being in a secure enough position where I was able to quit essentially and walk away from it. And then I was stay at home for a while. I did my coaching training during that time. And then again, I found myself going back into that same realm, but now as a contractor, so different circumstances, but still back into that area where I felt like I could make money doing the thing. So there's a level of comfort, even though it comes at a price. Like you have to shut pieces of yourself down and not have enough time for growing those other things, being close to those things that light you up. I did make the choice, but more on my own terms, with more strength, with more self-value, trying to balance the two things. So saying like, this is in my life, I'm also choosing this, and it will be at a balance. Of course, then this one started, the contracting work started to take on more power. Then again, I had to go through 3.5 years. I was a contractor, and I had to, again, have a similar conversation, brought up some of similar emotions, but a little different. But ultimately, this time it was like, I need space to really try to apply myself to the thing I love. I need to know what will happen if I apply, when I apply myself to the thing I love. I need to know. It was like to a point where like, I don't want to wait another year to have to be in the same space as I am now.
So you got to the point of, hey, I can't wait any longer. I need to do something big. And I think you're referring to this most recent, I'm no longer going to
Yes,
do any more contracting work.
that's right.
But you kind of glossed over the
Oh,
opening of your creative arts studio. I mean, that,
just something that happened.
from my perspective, that's something big. Did it feel hard, or was it just you had
Oh.
the idea, you were able to marshal the resources, and you just did it? Did it feel easy? Did it feel hard? Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was hard, I will tell you, but it was also easy. Like it was both. It was both. And I had a plan. As I was contracting, I started doing the creative work, the creative wellness workshops here in November 2021. So probably like 5 months after we moved here, I started working with a local business where I would rent the spot or we would do an event there. So it has been going on for a while. And I had a plan. I had my notes on my wall that said vision, and studio was there in 2025. And then in 2024, in March, my husband and I were walking on Main Street here, and he sees the rent sign. He's like, why don't you call them? And I was like, well, okay, why not? We looked inside. It's a pretty small space. I was like, it's probably not going to be extreme in terms of rent and everything. So let me find out what's possible. And I did call, and there was a period where I definitely went back and forth, huge amounts of anxiety of like, well, what am I doing? Is this right? I'm about to sign this lease and pay money for this thing that I'm doing. And, am I going to be able to do it? Even though I've been doing it for a long time, but it's still different than when your name is on the lease and now you're financially responsible. I was like back and forth negotiating with my landlord, almost wanting it not to happen, but then also really wanting it, right? Like I was like, maybe she'll say no.
Yeah. If it's not meant to happen, like make it not happen.
And then, April was here and we were building furniture in the studio. And I remember I would take my shoes off in here It felt like a house, like a home or something that's like very precious. And then when everything was built, I remember sitting here and I have a picture of my grandmother here also supporting me. And I remember just being here like, what now? Now I have to open doors to let people in, which was very strange.
What about it was strange?
My truest form of my inner world, where my energy is so open and personal and real, like it's me. People walking into the space almost felt like they were walking into like a part of me. To cross that threshold, it like took a little bit. First, I had like a mini open house for just my friends, but it really did feel like I needed my own ritual around it. I don't know, how others feel about opening actual physical doors to a space, but for me, it was very much of my world is now more available for others.
Yeah, it's you showing up very authentically in a very obvious way. It's one thing to have a storefront on the internet, a digital business card on the
Right.
internet. That doesn't feel very exposing. Well, for some people it
It
might,
can. It
but
can.
yeah, but that's a whole different thing than the purpose of the space holds so much meaning for you.
Correct. Right. Right.
When we make transitions
Hmm.
and we are moving from one identity to another, even though we're moving towards something that is exciting and something that we want, and we know that it's an evolution of us as a human, there is a letting go. There is often some grieving that needs to happen. And so I'd be curious to know, what was your experience with having to grieve your former career or grieve this former version of yourself? Was there any grief in your
Hmm.
transitions?
If anything, there's a little bit of grief of when you release, and I had similar with my book, like when you release the thing that you were creating, now it has the potentiality to interact with the world, and therefore it's no longer yours in a
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
So it's almost like being able to allow it to then interact with the world and seeing what's possible, which is a different relationship, right? It's a different relationship with it than when you have all this idea of how you will feel there and how it's going to be. And it is that way, but then it's also other ways. And then
Yeah.
some of it is uncontrollable. Business aspects obviously kick in when it's your business and all of that stuff. So it becomes no longer so beautiful and so precious and so
Yes.
magical. It
Yes.
becomes tangible and actionable and all of that.
Yeah, and there's, maybe always, there are aspects of the thing that you like less. So running a business has some banalities to it,
Of course.
right? You gotta
Yes. Of course.
figure out how you're gonna prepare your tax
Right.
return,
That's right.
whatever it might be. What feels like it hasn't been said yet that you think is important to share on this topic of your transition, your evolution, creative wellness?
There's many things, but the thought that came to me is pacing. There's all these stories out there, and sharing stories is certainly wonderful because we get to relate to each other and we get to get excited for one another and maybe take some learning from another person. And it can be so that certain stories become so entrenched as like that's the way that it can be damaging. I had a moment of burnout with my beautiful Rising Heart business 4 or 5 months after I first opened. As I mentioned, I opened while I was still contracting. So I'm a contractor and I have a business, right? And the story around that is like people do this because they work at night. They don't sleep. You have to do whatever you can in all the hours of the day. This makes you the business owner, the entrepreneur. And then when you've completely burned the rubber so much that you produce some form of growth in the business, then you're allowed to release the crutch of the other support, so to speak, right? Like that's a story that we hear. And so I really bought into this story for myself. And I did that. And I did it consistently for 4 or 5 months. And, maybe some other people could do it for 3, 5 years. I could only do it for 4 or 5 months. And then I found myself in so much anxiety mode that I started having insomnia. And it was like 2 months where I could get only 2, 3 hours of sleep every night. That was very scary because I was like, I broke myself. Luckily, I was able to repair, and I repaired through rest, through really pulling back from Rising Heart. because I couldn't. Contract is contract. You have hours you have to deliver. I had to pull back from Rising Heart in terms of like production, in terms of like how am I going to produce my content, how many events I'm going to have, how much I'm going to write my newsletter, how I'm going to reach potential one-on-one coaching clients. All of that stuff had to just really draw back. And I had to make a choice of what is the minimum. I had some minimum things that I have to do, and that's what I will do. Thank goodness that I was like, okay, something's wrong. Let's stop. I have practice with listening to that part of me that says something's wrong. This isn't you. This isn't your way of doing this. I have practice with that. So I was able to hear it. And if I didn't have that practice, or if I didn't hear that, I could have potentially kept going. And then I don't know what would happen. Now, finding myself here, recognizing how important it is to be fair to yourself, fair to who you are and what you're capable of doing. That's one thing I think is important for people to evaluate what is your own pacing, and at what point does your entrepreneurial venture or passionate venture have the capacity to also overtake your identity, also begin to encroach on your rest and your well-being. And it can. And so we have to, again, we are the center of our world, of our well-being, of our capacity. And so that is the center that we need to protect and resource. Creativity, I believe, resources that part.
Beautiful wisdom that you showed in making the choice to pull back from the thing that you were most passionate about, really. But it also shows your commitment to integrity. So you had some commitments over on the contracting side, and you needed to finish well there. You needed to see those through. And so that's what you did. But you didn't stop completely with Rising Heart. You
Right.
said, what's the minimum amount I need to do to feel like I'm still engaged, I'm still moving forward? And let's not forget, this whole time, you've got 2 little kids that you're
Right.
co-parenting with your husband, both working,
Yes.
both parenting. And that story that you talked about, that's really that hustle culture, self-sacrifice in the name of I don't know what. One thing I love to think about for myself, and I say this to other people, clients, my friends, we have the rest of our lives to become who we're becoming. On one hand, it's urgent to begin and to engage. And then on the other hand, there's no rush. As long as you're doing enough to feel like you're engaged. And I guess that's where if our meter is broken around enough, and we're always thinking that what we're doing isn't enough,
Right.
that's a whole nother conversation.
Absolutely.
If people are feeling, after listening to this episode, if they're feeling like they might benefit from working with you, they can work in person with you if they live near Metuchen, New Jersey. They can work online with you. How do you work virtually with people? How does that work with creative wellness?
We have Zoom calls when it comes to one-on-one coaching clients. It's a Zoom call, and then I ask for people to buy certain art materials, because even in the coaching sessions, we will use art supplies. When clients talk in imagery, that's a good signal for me sometimes to get into a little bit more of like, what does that image look like? What's in there? So it's kind of like a conversation opportunity. So yes, I ask people to have very basic $25 worth of materials, or you might even already have it in your house. A lot of people do have something. So that's really what it is. It's a Zoom conversation, and then you have art materials in your home, and we will have the conversation and make art. And sometimes I have clients that want to make more art. So it'll be like a flip. I work the coaching, which is directed for goals and directed for growth. That's one pathway. It's the coaching pathway. And then there is a creative pathway where it's simply for rest and like restoration. So more restorative in terms of you are with your art. And we might speak a little bit about your art, about how your day's been. My pillars are creativity, conversation, and community. Conversation has to be there, and it has to be deep enough. That's my measure of true connection. We have to have some depth into what we're going to talk about. So on both the coaching pathway and the creative pathway, we're using art, we're using conversation, and we're helping you to get into your world at a deeper, more intimate, more intricate level.
Oh, I love that. I love that, how you're applying it the 2 different ways. So one is like, hey, let's use it to help you define goals, move towards goals, build momentum towards goals. And then the other pathway is the word that's coming to mind is burnout, right? Hey, are you burnt
Yeah.
out? Is your nervous system fried?
Yeah, right. Like, do you need to just
Do you need to recover? Let's just spend some time together there. And so it's not art. I mean, it's therapeutic, but it's not art therapy in the conventional sense, let's say.
It's true. It's a good distinction to make. And I do make this distinction. I think everybody in the expressive arts, creative wellness realm who is not a therapist will have this disclaimer that yes, the work is non clinical. There's no diagnosis, there's no treatment of a mental challenge. And based on the benefits that we know about art and creativity, it is therapeutic just by itself, just similar as like breath work is therapeutic as a practice. So it has the benefits, but you're absolutely right. It is not clinical therapy or treatment of any form.
So, what's the best place for people to find you?
So you can find me on my website, which is risingheartcoach.com, and also Instagram. So Rising Heart Coach on Instagram. People can reach out to me via email if you have any questions. I offer free consultations for whether you're curious about how to be more creative, how to use creative wellness in your life, how to work with me as a coach. I love talking to people about this work.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about it. And I'm sure you bring a lot of benefit to your clients.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thanks, Vika. Hi, Kelly here. If you liked this episode, please share it with someone who could benefit from it. I'd love to hear from you. I would love it if you would rate the show, of course. 5 stars. What would make a real difference, though, is if you leave a review sharing what you like about the show and what you want to see in future episodes. I do want to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in. Your time is precious, and I feel a lot of gratitude that you're choosing to share some of it with me. Catch you next time on Life from Within.